Jonathan McLaughlin, their starting right tackle from this past season. Big guy, 6'6", 6'7". Really solid pass blocker, run blocker. I think he's had some footwork issues, which is especially in pass protection. He's gotten beaten a couple times by some lesser defensive ends. I think that's why he slid out of the draft, but he's a guy who could be a really under the radar, undrafted free agent. Another guy, Ekanem, defensive end, signed by the Denver Broncos. Ekanem is 6'4". He doesn't have elite speed, but he's got great playmaking ability, which he showed in his best year as a sophomore a few seasons ago. So I think Ekanem is the guy who can latch on there with Denver, maybe make a practice squad and make some noise if there are some injuries there in front of him on a really solid unit for Denver. Nigel Williams, defensive tackle, signs with the Buffalo Bills. Nigel Williams is a pretty big kid, 6'4", 6'5", about 290 pounds. He's been a plug-and-play guy for the Hokies here for a number of seasons. He's been in the rotation multiple times, whether there were injuries in front of him or if he was just in the rotation just because he was, a really solid player as a starter. Nigel Williams was a really effective player in the middle of the defense for the Hokies. A guy who Nigel Williams sat behind a good bit as a starter this year when the Hokies went with a three-man defensive front was Woody Barron. Woody Barron's got a ton of upside. He showed that multiple times this season. He developed into one of the better defensive linemen in the ACC. He goes undrafted. That was a bit of a surprise to me yesterday. I thought Woody Barron might be a guy who would be drafted in the 6th or the 7th round, just given the season that he had for Virginia Tech. He's a little bit undersized, so that's problematic, but I think Woody Barron latching on now with the Dallas Cowboys, that'll be a good opportunity for him in a defense that's trying to get younger. And then one additional guy who didn't play for Virginia Tech this past year because he transferred to the University of Maryland was Trey Edmonds. Trey Edmonds, of course, was a former running back, battled a bunch of injuries there with Virginia Tech over the last few years prior to last season. He had the huge game against Alabama in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game a few years ago. He had that long 77-yard touchdown run, kind of put his name on the map as a redshirt freshman. Developed some injury issues, but latched on with Maryland and had a pretty good year for them this past year. And now he's going on as an undrafted free agent with the Kansas City Chiefs. So great opportunity there for Trey Edmonds, and hopefully he can make the most of the next level and stay healthy.
Yeah, Woody Barron, my goodness, he really took advantage of the opportunity you just mentioned. 18.5 tackles for loss pops off the sheet for me with 5.5 sacks this past season. Nigel Williams, actually, statistically, you could provide more context to this, but statistically, at least by far, at his best season in 2014 as a sophomore with 9.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, and by far his most total tackles. And then Ken Ekanem with 22.5 sacks in his career, 34 tackles for loss, was really a productive player and pretty much matched his production each and every year, his final 3 seasons for Virginia Tech. So be interesting to see how those guys play out. And they're obviously fighting for their jobs and fighting for their careers here starting at the end of July. Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC doing a ton of work researching these guys, and he's been watching them for their entire careers there at Virginia Tech, breaking down the Hokies selections within the NFL draft and undrafted status for the rest of these guys. Mike, we appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Mark.